Are existing solutions able to take advantage of real threat intelligence? Common solutions like firewalls weren't designed to handle the massive and growing volume of threat indicators. This challenge often results in significant gaps in your protections, even when you think you have it covered. You need to protect yourself by filtering network traffic against unique threat indicators in a way that allows you to act. Palo by Bandura Systems is the solution that filters over 10 million indicators right out of the box. Developed with the Department of Defense, Palo is affordable for companies of all sizes. Get your free trial at bandurasystems.com. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly.
All right, as promised, we're going to give you our featured interview with Ron Gula. A lot of you know Ron because of his time with Tenable. He has turned into a fantastic investor, still very excited about the security space. So he sat down with Paul and I. He was actually in studio, so he sat down next to Paul, and I joined in. And we're going to run that interview for you a second, in which he answers the question, why is it called tech adventures as opposed to investments or whatever? And you're going to like the answer. Let's just remind you quick, Source Boston, we just got talking about shows and how to make the most out of the shows. Source Boston is going to be May 9th to May 10th. If you go to sourceconference.com, you can register using our code SW75WMKW. It's on your screen. You can come to our show notes at securityweekly.com and get that. That's going to get you a $75 discount. And you can take some of our advice from today. You can scope out the vendors that are going to be there that you want to talk to. You can prepare to have good conversations with them. Think about the talks, how you want to act on it, how you want to do better. Set your intention, set your purpose, and you can meet the Security Weekly team when you're there. All right, because it's a pre-recorded interview, we're going to roll into it, and I will see you next week. I am at Catalyst on Twitter. Paul is at Security Weekly on Twitter. We love hearing from you. We love engaging. You can find us on LinkedIn or the Contact Us page. Send us a note. Let us know what you think, what you'd like to see more of. All that feedback goes into the programming and a lot of great stuff we got coming your way. But until then, we'll see you next week, 1 p.m. Mondays. Facebook, YouTube, you can catch us live. We'll engage if you're there with us. Let's have our conversation now with Ron Gula, talking about where he's still excited about tech investment and security investment in specific, some of the things that he does and doesn't look for. And he talks about attorney-client privilege, which if you didn't catch, we talked with Sean Tuma about last week on episode number 81. You're going to love the way this all comes together, and we'll see you next week. So we're going to have an opportunity to sit down with Ron Gula, the president of Gula Tech Adventures, and we'll ask him about that if you don't know why, but it's a perfectly named company. But one of the things we look at a lot is risk and how we're managing risk, and then we can probably do a little bit better and talk about the efficacy of our efforts or the efficiency of our efforts. And it was a conversation we had just started before we decided to record and said, hey, let's talk about that. So Ron and Paul are in studio. And welcome back to Business Security Weekly, Ron. In fact, last time you were here, I think it was called Startup.
Yes,
so
it was, yeah.
Welcome to the change.
Good to be back.
Welcome to the new face called Business Security Weekly.
I like the new face.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I mean, we changed the name and a little bit of our focus, and I think everyone's been digging it. So, Michael, yeah. If you want to kind of start us off and
for a little bit more background too for Ron. So he's been on the program, but founder of Tenable, good background in the industry prior to that, and understands the investing side of it. So kind of like perfect guest for Business Security Weekly, where, and Ron, the way we explain this to a lot of people now is it's what we're trying to do is take a look at the business of security so we can do better at securing business, but we still look at innovation. We still look at communication and leadership, all the stuff that we were covering. It just now lets us keep that really neat security focus to it. So that gives us that chance as we're talking with you. When you start looking at risk management, and even when you think about where you've been able to invest in your adventures, where do you look at the space? Let's start there. How are you looking at that space, and why does that matter to just somebody who's watching the program today, sitting in an enterprise thinking about how to better manage their risk internally?
Excellent question. So, we have RSA coming up next week, and when you walk around, you're going to see all sorts of companies who help you reduce your risk. And I don't know what that means. After 20 years being in this space, it's sort of like, we all talk about risk reduction, cyber hygiene, but we don't have a set of standards that says, oh, you have to do this to be secure. If you do, it's compliance. And then we can have an argument, is compliance a destination, or is it the starting line? It's really kind of difficult. But there's a couple things happening in the market right now. One is third-party risk. So we're having, everybody realizes if you have a company, you don't just have a network anymore. You've got all these other partners in your supply chain, where you get your power from. How do you evaluate the risk on that?
I think Sears and Saks Fifth Avenue was a recent example of that, where they basically said it was a third-party chat service.
Absolutely. And then if you are making these decisions about maybe not running your own applications, perhaps putting them into the cloud, well, that's a dependency. Well, how do you evaluate the risk of that, right? Everybody can talk about, hey, there's a Windows computer, it misses this vulnerability. But if you take that application and you move it to something like Office 365, did you reduce risk? Did you transfer risk? It's a really, really difficult question. And there's been a lot of really interesting companies out there. Risk Lens one, you've got Cyvar, you've got different variations of this, Risk Recon. You've got companies like CyberGRX that make the auditing side of this, or the requirements of auditing your supply chain, a lot easier. But we really don't have an opportunity or a set of standards that allows us to say, if you do X, Y, and Z, you can get cheaper insurance, or you're secure, or that sort of thing. And that's where we're at right now.
Well, I was going to point out is I've always loved insurance for that. And Paul and I have talked to a dozen people over the last couple of years, and I think that's where we get really good results. But you've pointed out something. I'm curious kind of your take on it, because you've been around the Beltway and you've looked at federal standards and you've grown the company around helping people figure some of these things out. Why don't we have a set of standards yet? Are we just not mature enough for it? Or is it that we have too many standards to choose from? Or our measurements are so crude that we just can't get there? Or is it something else?
It's a moving target. So you've got new technology. So, when we started Tenable, nobody really cared about mobile phones. Now you've got cloud and you're outsourcing the data out there. And then the regulators are catching up. So now we have GDPR. So what was good 2 years ago is interesting, is not going to be relevant 2 years from now, or we're going to have to play catch up. And a lot of these really big organizations, they have 5-year, 10-year technology roadmaps. There's a lot of people who it's a big deal to upgrade to Windows 10 in 2018. That's the major thing. We're going to upgrade to Windows 10. And that's why it's so hard to then say, well, how do we fight nation state hacking? How do we stop infrastructure attacks, from third parties? How do we stop simple malware? And it's tough. It's really, really a difficult problem. And it's okay if we said, this is you need to look internally and do this. The best thing we've had is the NIST cybersecurity framework. The problem with the NIST cybersecurity framework is that if you do everything it says, your IT budget just tripled and it quadrupled. And you don't
never thought of it that way.
Yeah,
but
you don't have it.
See that,
and it's one of the reasons why people keep falling back to incident response and intrusion detection. It's easier to wait to get hit and find the bad person in your network than it is to try to prevent that.
But in this case, the bad person may not even be in your network.
Right.
And I guess that's my question when we think about, we talk a lot about startups still on the show today and across the network, really, about it's exciting to look at the new cybersecurity startups. But if I think about it in the context of this conversation, I'm creating a new company. And sure, there's the whole investing side and your go-to-market strategy, but the IT side, creating a new company, I have computers for my employees. I don't really have much infrastructure anymore. And do you look for this when you're investing? Like, how do I do security today if I'm creating a brand new company?
If you're creating a brand new company, you have no legacy they have to deal with. You have no culture you have to deal with. You can kind of create things. And the great examples of these are like Uber and Netflix, right? These companies were created to take advantage of internet technologies, right? Google Maps, global positioning, mobile phones, the drivers, the cars, nothing that Uber does. Majority of what they do, they don't own. Yet they were able to create this huge, company that's out there. And we're seeing a lot of startups where they're cloud-based. They solve things like certain APIs. They share data. The infrastructure that they need isn't supporting 10,000 global employees, right? It's not supporting, hardware, things that have to ship and stuff. So those new companies are definitely easier. For companies of 50 people and less, what are their risks? Well, malware, physical attacking of the facilities. That's definitely an issue. But the thing is, it doesn't change when you get to the scale of a Citibank or the DoD. What changes that level is there's probably a lot of people who think about this a lot, and they think about it in terms a lot different than we do.
Are there certain strategies you recommend for people to assess their security architecture as it relates now to a lot of my services are either a service that's in the cloud and some of my infrastructure, maybe a lot of my infrastructure is in the cloud? How do I assess that and make sure that I don't have a breach, that I'm not the next Sears or Saks Fifth?
So you can never prove that. You can never prove that. And if anybody could, we'd be talking about it right now. So I tell people it's a good thing to ask, but don't dwell on that. It's sort of like people who become hypochondriacs. They get really, really worried, and then they worry themselves to death almost. So in cyber, I say, look, if whatever industry you're in, you have to be compliant. So start there. Prove that you're compliant, and it doesn't matter if you like compliance. You should be able to prove that you're compliant, and you should be able to have a conversation with your management about being compliant or not. Sort of the next level up from that is picking a framework. I don't care which framework. NIST Cybersecurity Framework, Center for Internet Security, the Australians. I mean, there's so many different frameworks you can choose, but having a framework allows you to have a conversation with your management about what you're doing and what you're not doing. And you have to have that conversation. Maybe your backups stink. And in order to upgrade your backups, you got to buy a SAN or spend a lot more money with Box or Dropbox or one of these backup companies like Druva or something like that. And that's where a lot of people stay. But if you get beyond that, then the third thing is to actually have a conversation about the efficacy and the efficiency of your network. Are you spending too much money on your controls? Do you need 3 firewalls? And I've actually seen organizations, how many forms of authentication do you need? Are you going to do some application consolidation? And then, is your investment efficient enough? Like, you might have an investment and your incident response time, you might be able to go from a serviceable agreement maybe down to 72 hours, like what is required by GDPR. But those 3 different phases, depending on the sophistication of your network, being compliant, doing a framework, trying to then improve on what you're doing, a lot of people don't realize where they're at in that thing, and that's one of the problems we have with this conversation.
Yeah, it's not knowing what problems you have.
Ron, I love the advice. Pick a framework, any framework. Just pick something and then understand it and use it to advance forward. Do you think that we'll find then that as more people start to do that, that either the different frameworks start to look more alike, or we do find that there is a framework that's better for either certain sizes or certain types of businesses? Do you see that gets better, or it's really not that important, so just please pick any framework and let's get to these higher level conversations?
So if we were in the aviation industry and there was a whole bunch of airplanes that were crashing or were burning fuel and just they could carry passengers, we'd be like, okay, look, we need to start over, right? But the reason why most airplanes look the same is because we've had almost 100 years of aviation or so, and we've got a lot of best practices. In IT, the tech keeps changing. And what we're trying to do is basically go to a network that's already designed, already deployed, already has a culture out there, and then trying to change that. That's a lot harder to do than designing a network. And if you go to certain networks, like the process control people, the power in the industry, those networks are designed to keep the power on. They're really reliable. They're resistant to a lot of different, everything from Russians to raccoons in some cases, right? But if you go to a large IT network that's maybe a major insurance company, and you go to another large IT network in a different insurance company, you're going to see a completely different culture, completely different tech stacks, and that's why it's so hard to apply these policies. So I don't think we're ever going to have one framework that's going to allow us to do that. I like defaulting to the NIST cybersecurity framework because you can talk about assets all the way to recovery. Without being too, and you can have that conversation with non-technical people. And if you squint your eyes at like the SANs, the CIS, top 20 controls,
sure,
they're pretty similar, right? So is ISO, they're all talking about knowing what you have. Do you need what you have? Are you protecting it? And can you survive an attack?
It's a starting point to build on, not necessarily the law.
Right. But if you look at, if you were going to go out and start, a competitor to Netflix, and you were going to start from the ground up, you're going to build some security in it. You understand that. And some of the most secure networks have it built in. You don't see layers of antivirus and layers of that out there. In many ways, this movement to the cloud, it changes how we do and detect vulnerabilities. You know, people who are all in on the cloud, they get the telemetry from the cloud, they audit the data, they look for that kind of stuff. Whereas people who have traditional networks, you know, VMs, full servers, you know, laptops, and that's, you're relying on antivirus, you're relying on EDR, you're relying on IOCs to kind of figure out what is bad. Whereas if you've built the network from the ground up, what is bad should be designed in and not let it occur in the first place.
Yeah, I like that approach a lot. I want to go back to the comment that if a business were to pop open the CSF today and follow it completely, their budgets go up. Because I think that that's not only a true statement, what I've loved about it is the accessibility. And I've started to notice that because we started talking about third-party risk management. And so what we're finding is there's a whole category of companies now that serve the Fortune Global 2000, let's say, the Fortune Global 2000, and now they need to be compliant with somebody else's third-party risk management system, and a lot of them are very confused about what that means or where they need to go. And what I find is pointing them to CSF makes a lot of sense, but then they look at it and say, well, I don't have this, I don't have this, I don't have this, oh man, how do I even get going with it? Ron, is there an intermediary step in there, or is this an opportunity for companies? Like when you look at this type of thing as an investor, do you say, well, then that's an option, that there's an opportunity now in this new market space serving those third-party companies? Or like how do you look at that challenge, both with your experience on both sides of the desk for this one?
So if you walk into a large enterprise IT shop, they're going to tell you that things are good. Have you ever met a CSO who didn't say their network was good? Right.
Agreed.
But then you have a deeper conversation. You say something like, all right, let's take the NIST cybersecurity framework. And I like to steal from Sunil Yu, right? Bank of America, President of Gartner, RSA. And what he says is you need to take all of your applications and your people and your different types of networks, and then go from asset management all the way over to recovery from the NIST, and then just fill in the blank with what is in there. And if you can't even fill in the blank on that kind of stuff, that's a great starting point without doing this huge assessment. Now, what tends to happen in corporations, though, is there's two types of security auditing. One is the self-assessment questionnaire, where I actually take a large number of questions, and I go out and I say, Paul, do you have antivirus on your desktops? I don't ask you how many desktops you have, but you're the field security officer for Division X of the company. I say, Paul, do you do patching? Yes or no, right? Do you have firewall? Do you have authentication? And I say, yes, 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 yes. And then I take all that data back and I bring it into my GRC, my risk management, and I have some sort of sense of what is out there. And then you cross-reference that with maybe what's actually on the network. Do you have Tanium? Do you have Tenable? Do you have a SIM? Do you have an asset inventory? And you try to measure those things. To me, an opportunity would be a company that could bridge those two things together. And Tenable kind of nailed the discovering what you have on your network and what's out there. I have never seen a company that could say, let's take that and convert it directly into some sort of risk computations. A lot of people claiming that they can do. What I'm telling you is that I haven't seen anybody who can really automate that.
Do you think it's because most organizations won't like the answer?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, we experienced that in Tenable.
Tenable,
sure,
absolutely. Right? I can remember when we were at Tenable, we would do basic things like, hey, if you scan continuously, you can start computing things like patch rates, and
right.
You could tell the difference between, are you patching on day 29 of a 30-day patch window, or are you patching continuously, right? Both of them say, I patch within 30 days. However, both of those organizations have completely different patch runs. That means I know that 29 out of 30 days you're not patched,
right,
versus these other things. So those kind of metrics, a lot of people hide. And another reason they hide them is because of compliance. If I know, this is very counterintuitive, right? But if you have an orchestration system, this is for your readers. If you go into RSA and you talk to these great orchestration companies, right?
Yeah.
Phantom,
Demisto.
Exactly. And you ask, oh, can you highlight?
Oh wait, our new sponsor, DF Labs.
The DF Labs,
yeah.
amen. And you say, hey, how quick can you identify when some, I don't know, network connection happens to an IOC and enrich? Oh, real time. Can you tell me if I have a new port open on my PCI compliant web application? Oh yeah, we can do that. Customers won't deploy that though because they actually don't want to know when those compliance things are it causes a lot more work than those things. And
I've even had some, Ron, I've had some argue to me that it increases their risk once it's documented, it creates a liability for them at the corporate and executive level. Do you agree?
I've actually heard that a lot. I've actually seen an interesting approach to this. It hasn't taken on a lot, but if you have the auditing done by your general counsel, not your general, but your law firm, right now that's done on attorney-client privilege and not necessarily done as a matter of record for your organization. And this is actually a really interesting thing, especially if you look at people testifying before Congress. When did you know? Like Equifax, when did you know? You know, and it gets really interesting at tracking that kind of stuff. Doing the right thing, doing the compliant thing, are often generally two different things.
Well, so when you look at that gap, and so we've identified, I mean, like, so it's worth thinking about it. I like that idea of somebody who can connect those two things together. But as Paul pointed out, some of us don't want that answer. I think for some people too, it's a and then what, right? And what would I do with it? But I think there's a third challenge, which is, I don't need that. Why do I need that? That's what I'm for. That's why I have a job. When you're investing in companies, when you're looking at the innovation in this space, how well understood does the problem need to be at the beginning? Like, does everybody need to get to the point where they look at that and say, yep, this is a problem, I need a solution? Or do you think that the right technology, the right company goes and figures out how to tell that story where enough other people go, oh, you mean I don't have to do all that? Okay, sign me up. How do you, when you're looking at that, how do you evaluate it?
So when I do evaluations of potential investments, it's a little bit simpler than, of course, we want the company to be effective, but a lot of times effective companies aren't sellable because you need to have a ability for customers to want to buy them and have a solution, a use case that really works. I'm also interested in, can we work with a team? You know, are they coachable? Do we have something to offer? You know, and that. But so when it comes to risk, we've looked at probably about 20 or 25 companies that claim to do some sort of risk calculation and make it easier to visualize risk. And about half of these people don't realize that people like Tenable, Qualys, Rapid shipped solutions in this space, the features of those platforms. And the other half of the people don't realize how hard of a problem this is going to be to walk into a chief information security officer and sell them a product that they've been doing by hand or with Tableau or some other big data analytics thing from a business process point of view. So a lot of these risk products aren't really sellable. They're features, or they're not even features that are going to be acquired at some point.
Do they have to
I love that
replace Excel spreadsheets too? Is that
there's Excel still really, although I hear Tableau a lot more than
Tableau. So what is Tableau?
So I'm not a Tableau user. Think of it as a very, very advanced data modeling spreadsheet.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Somebody from Tableau is watching this going, no,
Yeah.
business analytics platform, right. So
do more than pivot tables.
I'll give you
Just
a good.
come try us out.
Yeah, I'll give you a good example. So so there's a chief information security officer who, they're a Qualys shop, and I was telling him all the great things you could do with Tenable, like the dashboards and Tenable IO dashboards and Security Center. And he's like, yeah, that's not our use case. We literally take all the data out of Qualys, we dump it into Tableau, and that's where we do our data enrichment and our asset, pivoting and all that kind of stuff. And it's akin to, like, if you bring in a security vendor, they get to analyze all the data and give you the result. Some organizations don't trust that, and they want to go and do their own thing. And then the problem I have as a vendor is that sometimes, you get this illusion of, I've done a good job. Like, I was in a discussion the other day where somebody posted probably about 100 to 200 fingerprints of web services on the perimeter if you want to do your own scanning. And I'm thinking, okay, that's useful. Everybody's real excited about that. I'm like, yeah, but the Tenable list is like 5,000, 8,000 long, right? So how do you say, oh, what you're doing isn't good? Well, it's better than not doing anything, and doing something else requires you to change your processes. So sometimes, bureaucracy and the complexity really gets the better of larger organizations.
Michael, more questions for Ron?
Because Paul doesn't have any.
Well, it's funny because
Ron's known me too long.
Well, and I find more and more that Paul and I tend to ask the same questions, but I was still just processing the stuff that you were just sharing there, because there's a lot of wisdom in that for people to take a look at. When you start making investments, so let's talk about that side for a second. First of all, why did you call it Tech Adventures?
It's not a travel agency. Right? No,
I was hoping you could book our next family vacation.
That's right.
To the Congo
that's
or something, right?
in all honesty, so when I left Tenable and my wife Cindy, worked at Tenable, and we were kind of looking at what everybody says, what are you going to do for your next adventure? And then she said that'd be a great name. And we were getting a lot of this. Are you going to call it Gula Capital? Are you going to put a, and then of course, no offense to any venture capital firm that's got, the vision of the guy hanging off the cliff, and we're like, we didn't want to do that. We wanted, it's an adventure. And when you leave your job and you have an idea, something you're passionate about, it is the biggest adventure. You have to recruit people to work with you. You have to communicate your vision. You've got to go find customers. And if you're in cyber, you're fighting the evil hackers out there, right? So I mean, this is the best adventure that we got going. It's better than any movie. It's better than any book that's out there. It's very, very exciting. So we wanted to call it an adventure and not just ventures, right?
Growing up, my mom, we never went on vacation. We always went on adventures. And I realize now it's because her sense of orienteering is not very strong. So as she'll say, we never got lost, but we had quite an adventure along the way. I'll tell you what, though, Paul and I spend a lot of time, Ron, talking with folks about making the decision on if you're going to allow an investment and who you're going to invest with. And having somebody that's got that story, who's looked at it that way, I like that. Like, I like what that signals. I hope that helps you stand out among others, but it helps you kind of find that connection. So to the second part of my question, as an adventure, you've got tremendous experience in the space. You know what it's like to start a company. And I've clearly underplayed all of the stuff that you've done with Tenable. Are you finding that you like the space overall, or have you found that there's a niche within cybersecurity that is attracting you? And then within that, I'm kind of curious on what guides you.
Yeah, so at a high level, we've done about 25 investments, and about a third of those we did, as angel investors while we were at Tenable. And I thought it was a really good thing for me to do while I was CEO of Tenable, because it gave me a sort of a view over the horizon about what was coming, the struggles that these companies, were getting, helped me, guide Tenable, and that was a lot of fun. So now doing this full time, what I'm finding is we kind of split our investments into three areas. So hygiene, threat, and web application security. And what I've also found is that we've tried to go between very early companies, pre-revenue, pre-customer, in some cases even pre-shipping product, all the way where we've been, gracious enough to be invited to invest in B rounds and C rounds of, much larger companies like Contrast and Flashpoint and like Threat Connect. And what I found is that the view we have of the market of seeing all these people, how they sell, who they hire, who they're working with, which biz development teams from larger companies potentially doing acquisitions are doing. What I've found is that we can be very efficient. And if I have a conversation with a potential acquirer, for example, it might be of interest to one company, but it's pretty easy to say, well, hey, what's on your plate? What are you trying to do for your company? And then we can talk about that. So when it comes to making investments, we're not only doing that from like 20 years of doing like Tenable and network security wizards and working for the NSA. It's like, hey, for the past 18, 24 months now, we have been in the middle of most of cyber business. So I find it very exciting, quite the adventure, and it's a great way to be efficient.
What's your definition of a successful exit?
So when I talk to a potential investor, I ask them that question because I want to know what they want. The second time we did a company, we did Tenable. I didn't want to do it 2 years and sell the company. Sure. So if I'm working with a repeat founder, I'm going to ask, what are your goals? I want to make sure I'm aligned with what their goals are. Do they want to raise a lot of capital? Do they want to focus on the technology? Do they want to create a change the way people do cyber? I just want to make sure I'm aligned with that, because there's nothing wrong saying, hey, I got a great idea to do a certain thing in cybersecurity better than anybody else, but it's really a feature, right? Nobody's going to say that on their website, but
sure.
They're not out to create, sure. Tenable network security overnight, right?
UEBA is the shining example
sure,
today. Of
right.
That, right?
So if there's like 1,000 products in this space, and they're the thousands and first, and their goal, hey, we're late to market, but we're going to do, I don't know, AI, we're going to use the cloud, we're going to use crowdsourcing, whatever the buzzword, that's their angle. If I can get behind that and I can work with them, I'm very happy to do that. I think that's a great way to think about it. And a lot of times what you'll see, and it typically is like Silicon Valley, there's like 5 of every major types of companies, and they're all invested by the major folks, and there's not a lot of differentiation. But and I'm like, good luck to it. So I'm trying to do stuff that's going to be a little bit different. It's got a little bit of a differentiator, and yeah, I've been pretty happy with that approach.
It's awesome. What advice do you have for those of us that are evaluating startups? You know, I mean, we do that level. We were just talking earlier, right? Like we do that level to bring sponsors and partners onto the Security Weekly network. There's a certain evaluation criteria that Michael and I have been working on. It's kind of fun because I sometimes feel like I'm on Shark Tank when we do a. But also, if you're working for an enterprise today and you're looking for innovative technology, what types of things do you suggest that people consider when they're looking at startups?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is, if you're on the buyer side, is don't be bashful. So if you're taking a meeting with somebody and like 15 minutes into this, it's not rude to say, you know what, this isn't what I thought it was, I'm done. You know, and versus doing an hour demo. Right. Because you might learn something, but you really just wasted an hour. You waste an hour of their time
too, yeah.
Right. So don't be bashful. You know, be upfront. Say, this is my use case. If you can help me with this, it's really good. And so many startups, they're so smart. I mean, a lot of these founders have a vision and they have a technology. They have the ability to, you know, maybe solve multiple problems, and they might not have figured it out. What's the use case that they're really trying to do? So if you can help them do that, that's a good thing. Now the risk is they're acquired by Cisco tomorrow. You know, the risk is they go out of business. The risk is, you know, the tech doesn't work. So there's a lot of risk with that. But most of the larger companies don't innovate, which is really, it's an interesting thing to say. The larger you are, the harder it is to innovate. But that's because they've got products and roadmaps, and they're committing to 10,000 customers, and it's kind of hard sometimes for these big companies to come up with the next big thing. It happens. We thought we did it really well at Tenable, but it's something we were focused on. And a lot of times these larger organizations, they switch to just acquiring startups. So the question is what problem are you solving? And if they were acquired tomorrow, you know, can you still work with it? So again, not being bashful, can you buy a 3-year license of that product up front? Can you buy a 4-year license up front? Your money's probably going to be cheaper to spend that money up front with somebody and get the focus of that if you really like that. So I said, just again, don't be bashful.
One of the things that frustrates me with the speaking of acquisitions is larger company acquires some newer startup, and it might be one that collectively we were excited about, someone we took a briefing with, someone we talked to their customers, and they were like, this really helped us. I'm like, wow, it's exciting. And then the news hits and they're acquired. And the after the acquisition, I don't hear anything. I'm like, what's going on? That was really cool technology that could solve people's problems. Like, what happened? And sometimes you lose track of what happened to that technology, and that's frustrating. How do we deal with that? Why does that happen?
So it's interesting. This has happened to me a couple times. So when we sold Network Security Wizards to Enterasys, people are like, wow, it's like you guys disappeared for a year. But then we emerged, and we were the Gartner upper right Magic Quadrant for intrusion detection. Of course, the year after that, Gartner says intrusion prevention is the thing, right?
Richard said intrusion detection was dead, right?
So the market moves really fast, and a byproduct of that is some of the technologies you deal with are irrelevant, and that might mean the company's not irrelevant. Companies go out of business all the time. Most companies don't make it to you know, a big site. And then, are you a feature of a product you don't like? Are you a feature of a cloud platform you don't want? We've seen Amazon acquire some companies now. We've seen Palo Alto acquire some companies. And some people just, they can't do business with Palo Alto because they're a Fortinet shop or they're a Cisco shop. Right. You know, so there's all of these kind of things in the market, which is kind of interesting. Another one's open source. You know, is there a good viable open source alternative to do what you're trying to do? Maybe that's a disrupting factor. So there's a lot of, but it's really good to go to the startup communities. And I think that if you're in a position where you can't take meetings with startup companies, perhaps your city, there's like you said, Shark Tank, you know, is there an incubator that does cyber? A lot of major cities have these kind of things. A lot of the universities have cyber. Go and volunteer and be a judge, be a whatever, give them that kind of feedback. And be honest. Again, don't be bashful, right? Be honest about what you need, what problems you have, and you're probably going to get somebody who's going to solve that problem for you.
Michael, more questions for Ron along these lines?
No, I love that interplay, and that's one of the things that I hope that we're doing a better job on this program is both showcasing the challenges that people are facing as well as showcasing potential solutions and options, and then saying, you know, go chat locally, figure out the things that you think are interesting. I love the point about not wasting time, yours, theirs, or anybody else's. So if we could waste less time and be more articulate about the problems that we need solved and the problems that we're trying to solve, I think we advance quite a bit. Yeah. So that's always exciting.
Yeah, timing is a really, really important part of any business. Timing of the markets. Are people ready to buy something like this? And getting that timing right is so hard. And so I think it's really good for Phantom, I think, to be acquired by Splunk. I think there's a lot of orchestration companies. If they were sitting there thinking, oh, we're going to wait 2 more years, that might have been a bad decision. You know, and that kind of stuff happens all the time in the market. As far as being efficiency, I think the last time I was on your show, I said, look, in a slide deck, brevity is really the best thing. And a lot of times people want to hit me with like a 30 slide deck or a 50 slide deck. I'm going to look at the whole thing in 5 minutes, you know, and that's the first impression. So you really need to have, what's the one thing?
The one thing.
You know,
we preach that on the show. It's something Michael has talked about. It's something the sales books that Michael's, in all the books Michael have recommended in their messaging, in all 3 of them, Michael, that we use as the pillar for a lot of our conversations: play bigger, the brain audit, and never split the difference. All in their own way, they talk about really just having that one thing.
It's you know, a lot of times the founders, they're very smart. They're smarter than the average person, and they tend to think that the audience is just as smart as them, because most founders are humble people, and because of that, they bombard them with a lot of slides, a lot of content, or they try to educate them about the market. And that's one of the things outside of cyber. If you're in cyber and you're pitching to a cyber investor, the worst thing you can do is say, oh, there's more attacks this year than there were last year, therefore buy my product, right? That's like the biggest mistake I see.
No, that's a really good point.
If you're speaking at a business luncheon, sure, go with that, right? But not to somebody who's invested in, you know, a lot of different cyber companies, has been in the market for a long time.
Closing thoughts, questions, Michael?
Oh, I mean, we could carry on for a long time. I always throw these opportunities, and I hope you come back, Ron, and get to talk more about it. And I guess what I would ask is, are you cool taking questions? If people write into questions with us and they want to know more about it or whatnot, we can use it as a follow-up, or maybe even chat with you, you know, in between shows sometime, and bring some thoughts back, because it's great opportunity. I'm learning a lot from this, and so that I'm hoping our audience is also processing at the same level.
Yeah, I'd encourage anybody who wants to drop me a note, hit me on LinkedIn. I'm Ron Gula on LinkedIn, and the website's gula.tech, TECH. And if they want to have an adventure, they can send a really long PDF pitch to me, and I will give them very good feedback. That's one thing anytime we say no, we give a lot of feedback.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's great.
It's a great contribution to the community. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Ron.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Business Security Weekly. See you next time.